Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Hannon. I work on social impact. Among other things, we have a lot of projects around civic innovation, and we are really, really proud to be a partner and collaborator with Code for America. And welcome our luminary guest speaker today, Jen Pahlka. She's the founder of Code for America. She was recently the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer. I worked hard to memorize her title of the United States, and has been pioneering the use of technology, entrepreneurs, coders, visionaries to go work in government and tackle some of our hardest civic problems. And she came to tell us today about the Code for America Summit. It was a really big event that happened a few weeks ago that brought together more than 800 people who participate in this community, and 130 cities were represented. It was an epic 3-day event with lots of amazing collaboration, and she's going to tell us all about the work going on today. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And hello in there. I'm very excited to be here. We have a very special relationship with Google and have had support from Google from the very beginning of Code for America, and continue to be a beneficiary in many, many ways of this wonderful organization. So thank you very much. I did this TED Talk a couple of years ago, and afterwards, an editor of Wired came up to me and said, "I'm so glad your talk was good, because I saw that on the schedule and I thought, that's the perfect time for me to go do meetings." But apparently I had convinced him that government was innovative. I don't think that those of us who know the history of the technology industry should think of this as such a stretch, because, of course, things like GPS are due to government platforms. We would not have the mobile phones we have today, the services that we have that use location, if the government hadn't invested in this technology, but more importantly, opened it up to civilian use. So Tim O'Reilly, who's here with us today, has that great line that Ronald Reagan is the father of Foursquare, because it was under him that GPS was opened up to civilian use. And of course, you guys all know better, but many people, if you ask them where they get their weather, they believe it comes from Yahoo or Google. It comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at great cost, taxpayer dollars, and it's served out through these platforms. This is a great example of, I think, government enabling innovation in the private sector, for which we don't give it much credit. But the reason people still give me a hard time about this notion of government innovation, of course, is that we don't believe that it's truly in and of itself innovative today. And I think that the three major things that folks need to understand if they're going to believe that government is innovative. And the first one is something that, yes, is a bit of a stretch today, that interfaces to government, digital interfaces to government, can be simple, beautiful, and easy to use. We need to believe that participating in government means offering your hands, not just your voice, not just complaining, but offering to help or being able to help. You guys can see me there, I think. And that the government can be more, not like a tech startup or a tech company, but more like the internet itself, that solutions can come from anywhere and they can spread very easily where they need to be. So I like to tell, as an example, a story from our second year of Code for America, when we had a team of fellows. These are developers and designers who take a year off. It's their service year. They're wanting to give back to their country. They went to Honolulu. We do this partnership with local governments, and we had the privilege of going to City and County of Honolulu, actually a very large city. You probably don't realize it's almost a million people. So these three developers and designers were asked to go to the city and help solve a problem with technology. And when they heard over and over was that they wanted them to fix the city's website. It was actually it was tens of thousands of web pages without any CMS backing it. It was sort of a mess. And they said, in a year, the three of us are not going to be able to do this. Let's find a different problem that we could solve. But both the people that they were talking to, the residents of Honolulu, and the people in government kept coming back and saying, no, this is really a problem. So they decided to dig into it and just see what the problem was. So at the time, this is what Honolulu.gov looked like. Honolulu.gov is a sort of a classic government website. We're starting with government, the agencies and departments that are represented. The center panel, of course, is news releases. It's classic what government wants to tell you about what's going on. The fellows decided, let's start with data. That's probably a much better place to start. So they looked at the search logs. And they said, what are people searching for? Turns out the top search term, and I'm sorry, you certainly can't read this in this slide, is driver's licenses. Why would you be searching for driver's licenses? Well, A, most people don't know what level of government does what, but actually in Honolulu, the city and county does handle the driver's licenses because it's most of the population. And so they said, okay, if that's the case, let's figure out how somebody would find that information on this site. So if you type driver's license into honolulu.gov circa 2012, you would get a page that looks like this. You would get a page that looks like this. You would get about 20 pages that look like that. There is a lot of information about driver's licenses that we serve up to our citizens. And it's things like that last paragraph that explains to you that if you're a returning service member from overseas, you've got an extra couple of months after your driver's license is expired before you need to get it renewed. There's stuff about the new machines that are printing the new driver's licenses. But nowhere on the site does it actually tell you how to get a driver's license. So the fellows decided that they could fix this problem, and they built instead of fixing the site, they decided to sort of start fresh with an interface that is, as we like to say, simple, beautiful, and easy to use. And they created the content that they thought citizens needed to find. So if you type driver's license into honolulu.gov, you get this. How do you get a new license? Where you go. This is the where you go, what you need to bring, and how you make an appointment. Boom. This is what citizens actually are looking for when they're coming to government websites. Now, that beautiful interface was directly borrowed from our friends in the UK. The government digital service there is doing amazing things, showing to the world that this stuff can work. It can work well, not just information, but transactions and services. And so they really borrowed the technology. The government digital service over there was started when they had, and this may sound familiar, a $10 billion failure in health IT. And decided that there had to be a better way. So they hired a really fantastic guy named Mike Bracken, who had been the head of digital for The Guardian, to run it. They gave him the power and the authority to actually do the right thing with technology. And now over there in the UK, they are spending about 1/6 of what they were before to have more visitors to their site, and frankly, much happier visitors. They're getting the information they need. But so back in Honolulu, you have folks here who are creating this content and putting it into a beautiful interface, but they know that they can't do all of that work themselves. They built the content for really like the top 10 searches that they saw on the site, and then they said, we're gonna have to have a hackathon. But they didn't need any code written, they needed content written, so they held a write-a-thon. This is the wall on the co-working space a couple of blocks from City Hall in Honolulu, where they wrote out all the questions that were sort of suggested by the rest of the top search terms. I want to pull that over here. And they invited a lot of the people that they'd met through their residency in Honolulu, where they were going around and telling people what they were doing. They invited workers from City Hall. And they got together over the course of a Saturday in the middle of 2012. And these people in Honolulu got together and wrote the answers to those questions. They would share them back and edit them, make sure they were simple and clear. They would run them by the folks in city government to make sure that they were accurate, and they put them into Honolulu Answers. And at the end of the day, pretty much most of the questions that citizens need answered were in this interface as a sort of alternative to honolulu.gov. And more importantly, these people had a fantastic time. At the end of the day, they were drinking, having fun. The mayor stopped by and hung out with them. And I think it was probably the first time that I realized that government technology was actually like a party. And these people not only felt like they'd enjoyed themselves, but they now feel owners of this site, and they felt like they were helping their fellow citizens in a way using skills that they had, not just tech skills. So that basic interface is now in about a dozen cities around the country. On National Day of Civic Hacking 2 Junes ago, Tim and I went to a co-working space a block from Oakland City Hall and worked on a very similar project. Tim did a great answer about how you take paint to the dump. Mine was about chickens. Everyone asks me, isn't it illegal to keep chickens in Oakland? No, it's not illegal. You can keep chickens in Oakland. You just can't have roosters. You don't want them. They're very loud. So this is now replicated all around the country by citizens, by the people, but for the people who are going to use it. Actually, this is a screenshot from our site from ages ago. It's in many more places now. But those three things, I think, are really illustrated here. This notion that the interfaces can be much more beautiful and easy to use. The notion that people don't just need to complain, they can help. And the fact that these solutions can spread. And when you think of those things, I think you start to believe in our mission statement, which is that government can work. You can stop there, and we're pretty controversial. We believe that government can work for the people, for actual real people, by the people, helping out in the 21st century using these solutions. But it's not going to happen because we complain. It's not going to happen because we are frustrated and yell and advocate for government to do differently. It's going to happen because we, the people, make it happen. So I have spent the past couple of years just trying to get people to believe this, trying to tell stories that illustrate what's possible. And then last April, I was asked to come serve in the White House as the Deputy Chief Technology Officer, and got there and started working on this idea that we could replicate what they had done in the UK with the government digital service there. Brought the best talent from the tech industry to solving these problems and doing it right. But I was there a couple of months when this happened. Healthcare.gov launched and then crashed. And actually, I think there were many other people here who know a little bit about this process. When the site went down, it was October 1st. I was out here working on the previous Code for America Summit because the government was shut down and I was furloughed. It was a very frustrating place to be because this enormous thing was happening and I was in the center of all of the people who could fix it. And I wasn't allowed to even talk to my boss for several weeks. So it felt from the West Coast kind of like this, just like, oh my God, somebody fixed the problem. And on the other hand, here we were around all the people looking for us to, it's a barn raising, it's a hackathon. That's how we do things in Silicon Valley. Why can't we come out and help? Now, of course, people did come out and help. Todd Park, my boss, recruited people primarily from Google to come fix the site, and we'll talk a bit about that. But first I want to answer this question I've been asked so many times, which is, why did the site fail? Most people believe that from outside the tech industry, the question I get most often is, how could it have possibly failed? Didn't it have enough money? It must have been underfunded and underplanned. It was absolutely neither of those things. It was overfunded and it was overplanned. And when I say planned, I mean this. And I will not lecture to a Google crowd about the challenges of waterfall development, but this is de rigueur. This is standard operating procedure in government, that we do all of the planning up front. And when we do that, Clay Shirky had a great line about this, actually. He and I talked a lot during the year, and he wrote up an article in Foreign Affairs where he explained that the waterfall method amounts by to a pledge by all parties not to learn anything while doing the actual work. Waterfall method is what we do in DC, not just because it's what's comfortable there, but because we have a culture of legislation. It's sort of as if you wrote the rules around search quality or spam control once when Google started and it was written into legislation. And in order to change how you interacted with your users, you had to go to Congress. It's a very fundamental, difficult problem. But it is rooted not just in the fact that we run the country through legislation, but through a culture that assumes that things get written once and then don't get changed. So we do all of our planning, and then we execute to that plan, whether it's working or not, and it certainly was not working. The other reason that we do government technology through waterfall development methodology is that we have this thing called the Federal Acquisition Regulation. It is something like 2,600 pages long. And it's the regulation that it tells us how we buy things in federal government. Well, that unfortunately also means how we buy technology. And it says a lot of things in there about, if you think about it, if you were a buyer, you would want to know what you were buying before you bought it. So that has been interpreted as, well, we must know everything the software is going to do before we have any interaction with a vendor, which of course is going to lead to that kind of problem. Problems like this and others have contributed to what many think is about a 94% failure rate in federal IT. I know that sounds like a crazy number. I think it's actually true. If you looked at the number of things that did work but actually cost so much more than any sort of competent technologist would think it should cost, they're probably all failures, I think, in some way. And the ones that are successes run very much under the radar, just simply don't go through the process. But I think the more fundamental point about the failure of government IT is this. Yes, we are upset when our taxpayer dollars aren't spent well, especially when we know it could be done so much better. But there is a deep anxiety that our society exhibits when we realize that we cannot actually govern if we can't implement the policies that we create. And if you think about the years leading up to healthcare.gov, the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and all of the political will that went into passing that, and then to think that it almost went away, we actually almost lost that policy because we could not put up a website that works. Then you really see that our inattention to the federal government landscape is threatening our ability to have a functioning democracy. Am I scared you enough yet? Are you terrified?
It's a surprise.
You should be. Yes, it's not a surprise, but it is something we have to come around to. So when healthcare.gov failed and I was on the other side of the country sort of freaking out, I remembered this blog post that Tom Steinberg had written a year or two earlier about a colleague of his who was an absolute genius. The guy was a polymath, could have done anything in the world that he wanted to, but he had dedicated his life to civic technology. And sadly, Chris Lightfoot had died, and 5 years later, Tom was memorializing him with this blog post where he talks about this, why Chris dedicated his life this way. And he said, what Chris fundamentally had right was that an understanding that you can no longer run a country properly if the elites don't understand technology in the same way that they grasp economics or ideology or propaganda. And if you think about when you were growing up, and I don't know whatever age you are, who were the people who were going to go into government? Lawyers, economists. Digital people didn't go into government. Now that's going to have to change. And he says, Chris's analysis and predictions about what would happen if the elites couldn't learn were savage and depressingly accurate. And I think that what he's saying is that he was predicting healthcare.gov here and in Britain, and that there is something truly scary about a country that cannot implement its own policies. Savage and depressingly accurate, yes, but the story got better, as you all know. This was what Mikey I took this slide from Mikey Dickerson. I hope many of you know, but healthcare.gov is slightly less terrible today. Best headline ever. That was a couple months in, and then of course, by April, Obamacare had enrolled over 8 million people, which is more than we even thought would be enrolled through the program before the site failed. An absolute miracle. How did they do that? They did the opposite of what we've done before. They said that the geeks must come and they must be in charge. They brought tech talent to government. That's Mikey there, who I'm sure many of you know, Jeannie Kim, also a former Googler, Ryan Panchachadram, my colleague in the White House, and Todd Park hiding behind there. They came to government and they said, we are going to take this seriously. We, the people, must come, and we can do better. The thing that you should know, in case you haven't heard it, and if you, maybe can you raise your hand if you've heard Mikey speak before, just so, okay, not everybody has. The thing you should know about that team, Googlers and non-Googlers, is that it was like they were fighting a war. Mikey, I saw Paul Smith a couple weeks in and asked about his family, and hi Chris, he couldn't answer me. He said, please don't talk to me about anything personal right now, because he had been working for 20 hours a day for about 100 days. Mikey did the same thing, and when you do that, you become exhausted. And they did this for a reason. They did this because they knew that people in the country needed health care, and that they weren't going to get it if the site failed. I think that they are true American heroes. I think everybody who came to solve this problem really deserves not just our admiration, but our true gratitude. How did they actually do it, though? Because it was, as we say, a giant cluster. I mentioned all the planning that happens in a waterfall process. They just threw the plan out, and they started listening to the users. They were absolutely laser focused on what the user experience was and just making the site a little bit better every day based on what they could actually see people trying to do. The other moment that I really remember so well from that year was coming into the office very late at night, and Ryan Panchasajan was there, one of the people who was working with Mikey, and we were talking about the people who need healthcare. And he explained to me that about 3 o'clock in the morning every night, the site, healthcare.gov, was getting an enormous amount of traffic from very low-end smartphones. Because the people who need healthcare often don't have access to the internet, and they don't have nice iPhones and Android phones, and they have multiple jobs. And they knew that they were smart enough to know that the load would be lighter at 3 in the morning, so they would get up in the middle of the night and try to make it through healthcare.gov on a low-end smartphone, and they would get a little bit further each time. And that's how we got to that 8 million. Just think about who goes on a site like that at 3 in the morning. It'll give you a sense of the people that they were helping. They also, the other way they did it was to get a little bit, as we say, sharp elbows. Mikey famously had to threaten to punch people in the face in order to get basic monitoring on the site. He didn't actually punch you in the face. That was great. But the experience that team had really resonated with me because I had just left Code for America. We were starting to work on these very same issues. And Ezra Klein put it really beautifully in an article about healthcare.gov when he said that too often the press and the general public, of course, really doesn't even know the pain and the trouble of interfacing with government bureaucracy that the poor struggle with every day. So when Mikey and Ryan were talking about those people going on the site at 3 in the morning, it reminded me of the work that I had just been exposed to through our team in San Francisco. Watch this animation. This is just part of the process that you will go through if you try to apply for food stamps in San Francisco. I'm going to do that again for you because it's so much fun to watch. It's a lot of information that we collect. And do you see this here at the end? It's over 50 screens just to say. And you know what you do at the end of that? Can you see that middle button? It says print. You're going to print it, and you're going to fax it in, or you're going to take it in, and that stuff's going to get re-entered. This is how you apply for food assistance in the state of California. And we found out about this through a team that was working with the city and county of San Francisco on this problem of churn in food stamps. So once you do all of that, and then a bunch of other interviews, a bunch of other proof of income and things like that, you become enrolled in the program. And what happens then is you almost immediately fall off the rolls. Almost everybody who applies then is off the rolls pretty quickly thereafter, which results in the following. People will be at the front of the line at the checkout counter with their EBT card, electronic benefit transfer, what we used to call food stamps. It's now a card. They will have all of their groceries packed up and they're ready to go. They slide their card and it doesn't work. Very often, this again, speaking of middle of the night, is happening at midnight because that's when you think your card has been recharged. Who goes shopping at midnight? Hungry people go shopping at midnight. And they don't even know that their card doesn't work. And the reason why is because they've gotten several notices in the mail that look like this. This is actually one of the nicer ones. I'm going to read to you it because I feel like torturing you today. Your food stamp benefits in this quarter did not change as a result of the document/information we received because it would not have resulted in an increase in benefits. Your food stamp benefits in this quarter did not change as a result of the document information we received because it goes on like this for pages. And somehow from this, you are supposed to know that you need to call the office and provide some more documentation. I don't get that from this language, and neither does anybody else. But this is how we communicate with people who need food assistance in our state. And so when you get that, you don't do anything. Once you're on the program again, you need to find out where you can actually spend your benefits. And this is one of the interfaces you go through to try to find somewhere that will take your card. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not the most beautiful thing either. And of course, it's browser-based. You're probably doing this on a smartphone.
Welcome to the California EBT.
This is how you try to get your balance to figure out how much is on your card.
Number, followed by the pound sign.
You call in, you type in your number. But I think I've tortured you enough. I'm going to move on. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. So these are small things. I'm borrowing this from wonderful Jake Solomon, who worked on this. These don't seem like that big of a deal, but especially if you're poor, they really add up. There are 3.5 million people who are eligible for CalFresh, our state's nutrition assistance program, but not getting it because it's really difficult to get on the program. The welfare recipients are paying about $20 million a year just in the state of California in ATM fees, which goes straight to the bank. So you're on food assistance and you're paying $350 to use it. Most importantly, when you do have that, you need to call the office to stay on the program, you are often on hold for at least half an hour, often an hour, before you can even talk to somebody. And it's not just the digital interfaces. This is somebody applying for the program. They're using a pencil that's too small on a wall that isn't flat. It's just indicative over and over again of the experience that we put people through. These are the bathrooms in the Human Services Agency in San Francisco. It's a full experience that's not very pleasant. The good news is this is the Code for America team that's working on this problem. The guy in the glasses in front of the woman in the blue shirt is the person who led the challenge in 2012 to fix this problem of churn in the food stamps program. Others are fellows that have come to the program in 2014 along the bottom row who are working on super utilizers in the ER in Long Beach, California. And others who've just sort of come together to work on some of these problems that I'm going to show you. Sorry, the super utilizer is people who need health care. They don't have health care, and so they go to the ER over and over again. So they're very basic care. If you give them the services that they need, which often aren't health, right? Often they're basic social services. It's not that hard to keep them from returning from the ER, but we don't. What we generally do is just let them come to the ER. There are people who go to the ER 100 to 150 times a year. It's very high cost, obviously, to the system and very high cost to the individual. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that this team has been trying to do over the past year and a half. This was that notice that we talked about. What Jake found to do through many different efforts on this churn problem, not the first thing, but eventually what he landed on to do was a very basic text message that these folks get. So they still get those terrible notices, but when they're about to fall off the rolls, they now get a text message that says, your CalFresh benefits may stop at the end of this month. If you have questions, call us. So of the people who were enrolled in this program, 40% fewer fell off the rolls because of Promptly. And when they don't fall off, they don't have to go through that incredibly long process of reapplying. This is Alan Williams. He worked he was a fellow with us in 2013, working on something completely different, on essentially a GTFS for trails, an open trail standard specification. But he became excited about the work that his team was doing on food stamps, and so when the fellowship ended, he decided to not take any income and enroll in all the social services that he could apply for. So he spends a lot of time on the phone trying to get his services.
Operators are still helping callers. Please continue to hold, and your call will be answered by our next available operator.
The estimated wait time is 20 to 40 minutes.
So he spends a lot of time on hold. But he understands the experience that people in the system are getting. So the first thing that he did is remember that, actually, let me back up here for a second. Oh, I don't think I did the new deck. The first thing that he did is worked on what we call Clean, which is a 5-screen application for food stamps instead of a 50-screen. That works really well on a basic smartphone. Boom. So compare that to what you saw before. And you don't have to print it, exactly. Though when they get it in the office, they still print it, which is something we're working on. This is a very simple way of figuring out where you can spend your EBT cards. This is a very simple way that you can find out the balance. You just simply text in your EBT card. We have a very funky thing going on in the back end to figure out what it is, and then we text it back to you, boom. And Connect is just a way that you don't have to wait on hold. So you text in your phone number to Connect, and it tells you, great, I'm going to call the HSA, the Human Services Agency, for you, and when there's someone who can speak to you, it calls you back. Now, if you don't have unlimited minutes on your phone, as most of these people don't, this is a big deal. And when you're trying to work 2 jobs and get your kids to school, it's a really big deal. The thing that I love about this is this did not happen through the Human Services Agency in San Francisco. The guys just did this. We've now sort of pulled them back into the fold, but they were literally just doing this in a sort of an activist capacity. But when Jake, who had worked on this churn problem with HSA, told Leo O'Farrell, the head of the HSA in San Francisco, about this Connect product, Leo said, "That's fantastic. One requirement, though. It has to be my voice on the line that tells the social services worker to hold the line, or else they will hang up." He insisted on saying, "This is Leo O'Farrell. I have a client for you on the line. Please hold." When we think that people in government don't care, we're wrong. They do. They just need help. And when you give it to them, they want to engage. They're really an amazing group of people. So these little things, I think, are adding up to something of a better experience for people who have to deal with government technology. I think in California now, we're making a bit of a difference. But we are really still nibbling at the edges of an enormous problem. Government IT in this is an old stat. I think it's about $180 billion that we're spending on government IT right now. And the results speak for themselves. They're just simply not, we're not getting anywhere near $180 billion of value. Of course, good news, the United States Digital Service, the unit of the Executive Office President that I went to DC to set up, is up and running, and Mikey Dickerson is leading it. I couldn't think of a better person to do this work. He'll threaten to punch people, and he cares about the American public. They're doing amazing work. We also published this United States Digital Services playbook that explains to folks in government how you can get better results for much less money. I spent most of the time that I was there on number 4, build services that use agile and iterative practices, because the Office of Federal Procurement Policy that manages the federal acquisition regulation needed to understand that this is actually legal. And so in conjunction with the Digital Services Playbook, we also published something called the TechFAR Handbook that tells contracting officers and others who work in the field of procurement why this is legal, how to do it, and make sure they're very clear that the end of the day, the authority on procurement is the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. And when they put this out that literally says, we are helping you build digital services with a particular focus on how to use contractors who support an iterative, customer-driven software development process, as is routinely done in the private sector, that's change. It's going to take us a long time to see the results of that change, but that's fundamental change that you should be excited about. I do want to question the notion that this is innovation. I think this is the basics. Government should be able to ship a website that works, and we should not wrap it in the banner of innovation. It sort of degrades the notion of innovation in my book. But I do want to return to this idea that government can innovate. And I think that the most innovation that's happening isn't in this sort of battle between the West Coast tech wizards and the East Coast protectors of the way it used to be, but all around the country. This is a map of the brigades in the United States. A Code for America brigade is a group of volunteers who meet generally on a Tuesday night in City Hall. They're developers, they're designers, they're just random citizens who can write whatever, who work with their cities to make technology better, make the citizen experience better. So they do things like open data portals, and help with open data policies. They will stand up apps. They can implement any of the things that I just showed for people who use food assistance in their city. It's very easily redeployable. They're doing a wide range of things that the city themselves can't do. So not only are they helping the citizens of the city, but the real impact that they have is that the people in government see this and go, wow, maybe we could do better. There's innovation happening all around the country. This is an example of a project that the Code for America Fellows worked on in Charlotte, North Carolina this year. It's a very quick video, but I think of it as somewhat innovative in this sort of in a way that I kind of think about Google right now. I'm sure there's many, many more innovative things happening at Google, but I love that my phone tells me when I'm supposed to leave for an appointment now. I didn't ask it to, it just started doing that. But that notion of let's get information to a person exactly when they need it is sort of innovative these days. And so the folks in Charlotte asked our team to build something that looks a little bit, oh, I have to click this, sorry, hold on. You select the kind of thing you want notifications about, and in the next screen, it gives you a map of your city, and you can custom draw whatever geography is relevant to you. So you may want to know about special events across the whole city. You may want to know about new businesses just on the 3 blocks right where you live. It lets you do that, and then it asks for your cell phone or your email, and it texts you or emails you when there's a traffic incident or a water service or whatever, just in the area that you've written about, that you've defined. Here is a great thing, and I'm actually going to try to go over and demo it for you. A bunch of fellows this year decided that we need to have a much more broad dialogue about transit, especially here in San Francisco. And they built something that really looks like a tool. I'm going to demonstrate it for you really quickly. You can load up any city. I'll use San Francisco here, but you, just hit start. And you can draw any transit line you want. So you're going to put in your transit line. I zoomed out, so this is a very short line. And it'll tell you how much it costs per year. Sorry, now I got to stop. Basically, people all over the country have been using this. Let me see if I have, oh, I didn't put in an example. They're making transit maps the way they want them to be all over the country. And in fact, they're competitive about it. In Seattle, there's been these people sort of competing to do a better transit map. You can just load the current map and then edit it, or you can start with your own lines. But it's something that really, when it came out, you know, these sort of urbanist publications picked it up, and they talked about it as a toy or a game. And it is. It's really fun to play. Not that I showed that very well. But what we found is that actually, especially in small cities around the country, remember there are 30,000 municipalities in this country. It has become, in just a few short months, the tool they are using, the enterprise tool that small cities are using. It's displacing, displacing really, in many cases, these enormous spreadsheets that have grown up over time, but also these enterprise tools. So I do see signs of true innovation in government. There's many, many more. I'm not going to go into all of them with the time that we have. But I will return to this notion that it's not just about this idea of for the people from the Gettysburg Address, but it really is, when you look at people like Mikey and Jake who are doing this, they're doing it because government can work for people. Real people who need to interact with government, and not just the poor. We all have to interact with government at some point in our lives. And when you think about the people, it becomes much more real. And of course, by actual real people who are doing this work. The other way that I really stress we must think about this is without that middle. Government can work if we make it so. It's only going to happen if we come together and actually do it. Which is why I will end on an ask to you. We are just a couple of years old. We've gotten amazing support for the work that we've done so far, but there is so incredibly much more that we need to do. The first thing I would ask Googlers to do is to, and excuse me because I know that recruiting is difficult all over the Valley and all over the tech industry, but take a year off and do this with us. Our Code for America Fellowship Program is a year out of your life. We've had, I think, 4 Googlers do it so far. We'd like to have 40 more do it. We'd like to have 400 more do it. It's an amazing experience. You will learn and do and see things that you would never thought you would do. Marcin Wichuri, who did it 2 years ago, ended up learning a lot about the criminal justice system. And that's something I could do a whole talk on. It's a fantastic experience, and our 2015 class is already set, so the next opportunity would be for you to apply in the middle of 2015 for 2016, but I would love to talk to you about it if it's something you'd be interested in doing. We're able to do our work because the tech industry has done very well for itself, and we hope that people will consider donating so that we can do more of this work for the people who need it. It's not the only way that you can get involved, though. We recently, well, we did not launch, Ron Buganim recently launched the first ever GovTech fund. It's a venture fund just for companies that are actually going to disrupt in a good way the civic ecosystem or the government technology ecosystem. So I would encourage any of you who are thinking about doing businesses to look at that $180 billion market. A lot of that is going to change over the coming years, and the companies that are going in there to offer services that look like the kind of work that you do here are going to be extremely successful. There's also the opportunity to invest in companies like that. And then there's a million sort of casual ways that you can help. On our site right now, you can find our Civic Tech Issue Finder. So if you wanted to go, say, take an hour tonight and code on a project that has an open issue across our network, which includes not just Code for America projects, but across the civic tech ecosystem. So Sunlight's Foundation has projects on there. You can pretty easily find something that might need your help, do a little help, and feel good about yourself. But to me, whatever you do, the point is we are all told every day that we are primarily consumers, that our job is to buy things, but we really have to live like citizens, and understanding that your government needs you is part of that. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so a couple of questions. One is, maybe could you go into so first of all, the story, Mikey Dickinson's story is pretty inspiring, but it also reflects a pretty extreme level of personal sacrifice.
Yeah.
I presume most people who are applying this thing probably wouldn't be committing to that level. Right. So maybe you can talk about what sort of things you're looking for. And the second is, what's the process? I mean, I went to his previous tech talk, and it was like, well, if you're interested, send us an email. And I think for people on the fence, that's probably not really enough. You kind of want to know what you're getting into before taking a step like that and saying, I'm going to do this.
Right.
So, okay.
Sure. So, yeah, no, most people aren't working on something that's on the front page of the paper every single day. And therefore is pretty intense. In fact, I wish in many cases that more projects were that urgent, because then they would actually get fixed. But Mike Bracken, who runs the Government Digital Service, is always teasing us about the way Americans do things is through crisis. The way Britain does, we actually get ahead of the game. So, but if you look at what's going on in federal government right now and in local government, it's not 20-hour days, 100 days straight. There's a whole team now under 18F, which is the sort of implementation arm of our digital services play in federal government. They've got about 50 people now doing digital services right in the federal government, and they work regular hours on projects that aren't about to kill the president's major policy agenda. So yeah, it is mostly sort of normal jobs. I would also say I think Mikey's intake form, which is still up, you probably have all seen it, is still a great way to just sort of signal your interest. If you're interested in Code for America, we've got a lot on the site about what it's like to be a fellow that you can look at. You can also talk to me. And then the problem with the federal government stuff is it depends on where you want to go. But starting by putting your email out, someone will contact you, is a good way to go. I'm happy to talk to you more about what your interests are.
Google is my first company outside of government. Previously, I worked in NYC Digital and also
cool.
in the White House as the secretary of the Presidential Innovation Committee before you arrived.
Oh, great.
And so I think we share a lot of common interests. And the reason I left was because of the Snowden revelations. And I just found that I couldn't convince people to trust the government with their data in a way that I could before. And I sort of lost hope. So I'm wondering if in the year that you were at the White House, was there any pushback from OSTP against NSA surveillance? And do you have a message for people like myself who want to still continue to be in public service and use these skills towards open data, but don't know how to rationalize mass surveillance?
Sure. It's a great question. When I was at the White House, I saw firsthand the way that the tech industry can and should continue to use the fact that I think federal government gets that it's Silicon Valley that's going to save it. And yes, we should use that as leverage to ask for what's right around the rest of the federal government. So the president, while I was there, held a meeting with some top folks in the tech industry. I believe your CEO was there. And the first part of the meeting was to talk about digital services, and the second part was to talk about the NSA. I was excused for the second part of that because there was a lot of sensitive information that was shared. My personal belief on it, and I speak just as a citizen, is that I'm not okay with what is going on there. On the other hand, that's not an excuse not to help the people in our country who need help.
So one question from the Dory. Jonathan Betts is asking, how can lessons learned through experiences like healthcare.gov scale across all people in government responsible for technology?
I think there's two levels of answer, and the first one is the digital services playbook, and I showed a screenshot of it, is the lessons learned from healthcare.gov, and from every other technology project. But the failure of healthcare.gov gave that a lot more prominence and a lot more political power than it would have if we hadn't just had that crisis. So the playbook is now there. It's a good playbook. I think somebody on O'Reilly Radar wrote it up as not a playbook, not just for government. Any private sector company should follow this playbook. The problem is that you can know what to do, you can know what's right, and still have challenges within a culture and a bureaucracy that's done it differently for a long time. And so in order for those practices to actually scale in practice, can I say that? Those practices to scale in practice? We need to support the people in government who run into obstacles. And so Mikey's team is basically piloting a way to do that then they can take each time they run into an obstacle, whether it's a legal obstacle, a procurement obstacle, an HR obstacle, they're figuring out how to sort of blow that up and then documenting how they blew that up and then getting that out there. So what's that great line? The difference between theory and practice is always greater in theory than it is in practice. Did I say that right? Practice than it is in, okay. Point is, the recipe is there. It's going to take a long time before people are actually following it. And that's where, again, thank you for the setup question, Jonathan. It comes back to it doesn't work if you don't have people who know how to build digital services that way there, and don't accept a different way of doing things and can normalize it. It can say, well, I know that seems radical here, but that really is how effective digital services are built. I guarantee it. And it makes people feel a little bit more comfortable. So we have to have the people there to back up the playbook.
Working with San Francisco is great, and there's people around here at Google who will come help out. But how do you scale this to sort of local governments around the country? And there's so many, and there's just really it seems like not enough tech talent to take this broad.
Thank you. Yeah, so the question of scaling it to local governments is what we spend most of our time on. Here, I'll hold it for the next person, thanks. Steph mentioned our summit. So the plan has been basically show what's possible, spread the stories of what's possible, get more people interested, and then give them the tools to solve the problem as well. But they first have to believe that the old way is not necessary, right? That there's a better way and that it's doable. And so we've been working really hard on that. Our fellowship program itself doesn't scale very well. It's extremely intense. What we can do, though, is scale the outputs of it. And so we built a series of other programs that do that, including a network of people in government who sort of have drunk the Kool-Aid. Then we need to empower them to help them, pilot these things in their own cities. And that essentially is the play that we're running. It gets a little bit more sophisticated every year, and it gets more sophisticated because we get more resources. We have been a very, very small organization. Now we're about almost at 40 people. We could easily be 4,000 people and we still wouldn't have fixed the problem, but we'll get there because it's about building the network. It's not just us, right? It's the people in government who do it.
You mentioned the criminal justice system, and I think it's right now is kind of an interesting tipping point in the public consciousness about about reform.
Yeah.
And I'm actually working with a nonprofit that's looking at helping, or has specifically asked Googlers or tech people to open up some of the tracking that we do for people that are in the criminal justice system.
We should talk.
But anyway, I was just wondering, since I don't have a lot of time, is there anything specific in the criminal justice system that you guys are working on that's exciting?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's actually the area that I'm most excited about. We have identified 3 areas of focus for our work next year. It doesn't mean we won't do some other stuff, but our fellowship cities and fellows next year are going to be focusing on safety and justice, economic development, and health, which is really the human services work, a continuation of the stuff I just showed. But I have become sort of outraged, I think, at the way our criminal justice system is working. And it's absolutely true that a lot of that is due to terrible policy, but an enormous amount of it is due to incompetence of the system. We can't get people out of jail, people who are held pretrial that don't need to be. There was the article that you probably have seen in the New Yorker about the young man in New York who went into Rikers at 16 and was held without a trial for 3 years. A lot of that is simply the system can't just tie its own shoelaces in the morning. There is an enormous amount that we could do using data to get people not held pre-trial, and there are all sorts of follow-on effects to that. If they're not held, they're much more likely to be not convicted of the crime. There's an enormous amount that we can do to keep people from getting bench warrants. So a bench warrant is what you get if you rode your bike on the sidewalk and got a little teeny ticket that shouldn't be a big deal, but then you never followed up on it and you never cleared it, and suddenly the next time you're pulled over for something, boom, you're in jail. We have a lot of people in the criminal justice system for very, very petty crimes that don't need to be if we can just make the system work a lot better. We're interested both in the public safety side of it, how can we make our communities safer, and in how can we make that system far more just using data. We did a jail management dashboard in Louisville, Kentucky that actually Marcin Wietry, who was a Googler, worked on. It was sort of his major project. That's now being redeployed to Denver, but it gets at this basic problem. People literally don't even know they can't even look at who is in the jails and manage that population in any way. We've done these court date reminders so that people who need to show up to clear a parking ticket can either just do it through their mobile phone or can be reminded that they actually need to show up in court so they don't end up getting a bench warrant, and reduce the number of people who are jamming up the system. It is probably, after, name the top things, NSA and Guantanamo or whatever, one of our biggest national shames right now. We should be terribly ashamed of how our criminal justice system works, and we have to do better. So we're going to focus on that pretty heavily in the coming 3 years. Thank you.